Boron's eyes widened as she stared at the peculiar appendage between Greg Warren's legs. The Vidian scientist had never encountered such an organ before, and its presence ignited a storm of curiosity within her. Earth, 2157. The Vidian delegation had arrived 3 months ago, their massive ships descending from the stars with a mixture of hope and desperation. Humanity watched with trepidation as the aliens, renowned for their mastery of genetic engineering, revealed the purpose of their visit: to find a solution to their species' infertility crisis. Boron, a leading Vidian researcher, had been assigned to study human reproductive methods. Her subject, Greg Warren, was a 28-year-old human male selected for his genetic diversity and willingness to participate in the program. The research facility, a state-of-the-art complex built specifically for this joint venture, hummed with activity as scientists from both species worked tirelessly. On this fateful day, Boron was conducting routine tests on Greg when disaster struck. She accidentally activated a malfunctioning Vidian device designed to stimulate neural pathways in her species. The device interacted unexpectedly with her physiology when exposed to human pheromones, triggering a cascade of neurochemical reactions in her brain. Suddenly, Boron felt an overwhelming rush of unfamiliar sensations. Her skin tingled, her heart raced, and her vision blurred. She stumbled, catching herself on the edge of the examination table. Greg reached out to steady her, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right, Dr. Boron?" he asked, his deep voice sending shivers through her altered nervous system. Boron couldn't respond. Her gaze was fixed on Greg's lower body, a newfound fascination taking hold. She had studied human anatomy extensively, but now she saw it with fresh eyes. The device had awakened something primal within her, something that defied her scientific training and Vidian sensibilities. As the hours passed, Boron's behavior became increasingly erratic. She obsessively pored over human anatomical diagrams, paying particular attention to male genitalia. Her colleagues noticed her changed demeanor, whispering among themselves about her sudden fixation. Greg, uncomfortable with Boron's intense scrutiny, reported her condition to his superiors. The human research team grew worried about potential diplomatic repercussions if Boron's mental state continued to deteriorate. Meanwhile, the Vidian leadership debated their next move. Some argued for recalling Boron and terminating the project, fearing she might compromise their mission. Others saw her condition as an opportunity to gather unexpected data that could help solve their reproductive crisis. As tensions rose, Boron's actions became more aggressive. She attempted to access restricted areas of the facility, her desperation to understand these new feelings overriding her usual caution. Security personnel were forced to intervene, further straining the delicate relationship between the two species. Greg found himself caught in the middle of this interstellar incident. He was instructed to maintain distance from Boron while continuing to participate in controlled experiments. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him as he realized the fate of human-Vidian relations might hinge on his actions. News of the incident spread quickly, fueling anti-alien sentiment among certain human factions. Protesters gathered outside the research facility, demanding an end to the Vidian presence on Earth. The diplomatic balance, already precarious, threatened to topple. As both species grappled with the unfolding crisis, one question loomed large. Could they find a way to help Boron and salvage the research program? Or would this incident mark the end of humanity's first major interstellar collaboration? The tension in the research facility was palpable as Dr. Krell, the lead Vidian scientist, called an emergency meeting. The incident with Boron had shaken both human and Vidian teams to their core, threatening to unravel months of careful diplomacy and scientific collaboration. "We cannot allow this setback to derail our mission," Dr. Krell stated, his voice firm as he addressed the assembled researchers. "The future of our species depends on the success of this project." Greg Warren sat at the back of the room, acutely aware of the occasional glances thrown his way. He felt like a specimen under a microscope, his role in the experiments suddenly more crucial than ever. Dr. Krell continued, "I am assigning a new researcher to work with Mr. Warren. Zira, please step forward." A female Vidian emerged from the crowd, her posture impeccable and her gaze unwavering. Greg studied her, noting the stark contrast between Zira's composed demeanor and Boron's recent erratic behavior. Zira specializes in xenobiology and has undergone rigorous emotional control training, Dr. Krell explained. She will continue our work with Mr. Warren under stricter protocols. As the meeting adjourned, Greg approached Zira, extending his hand in greeting. I look forward to working with you, Dr. Zira. Zira regarded his hand curiously before mimicking the gesture. Likewise, Mr. Warren. I assure you, our interactions will remain purely professional. Days turned into weeks as the research resumed under heightened security measures. Greg found himself subjected to a battery of tests, each more thorough than the last. It was during one such examination that Dr. Marcus Clark, the human reproductive biologist leading the Joint Research Committee, made a startling discovery. Greg, your pheromone production has altered significantly, Dr. Clark explained, his eyes wide with excitement as he studied the results. The exposure to the malfunctioning Vidian device seems to have increased your compatibility with Vidian physiology. Greg furrowed his brow, trying to process the information. What does that mean for the project? It means you're more valuable than ever, Dr. Clark replied, already typing furiously on his tablet. We need to inform the Vidian team immediately. The news spread quickly, reigniting interest in the project among both species. Greg soon found himself spending long hours in a newly designed testing chamber with Zira, undergoing increasingly intimate examinations. As Zira's cool fingers pressed against his skin, Greg couldn't help but notice the intensity of her gaze. Despite her professional demeanor, there was an undeniable fascination in her eyes. Your epidermis shows remarkable adaptability, Zira murmured, her scientific detachment slipping for a moment. I've never encountered anything like it. Greg swallowed hard, acutely aware of the closeness between them. Is that good? Zira's eyes met his, a flicker of something unidentifiable passing through them. It's fascinating. As the days wore on, Greg noticed subtle changes in Zira's behavior. Her touch lingered a fraction longer than necessary during examinations, and her usual clinical tone softened when addressing him directly. During one particularly long session, Zira suddenly stumbled, her hand flying to her head. Greg reached out to steady her, concern etched on his face. Are you all right? He asked, remembering all too well Boron's similar moment of disorientation. Zira blinked rapidly, her breathing uneven. I'm experiencing unusual sensations. We must inform Dr. Krell immediately. The revelation that Zira's body was producing long-dormant hormones sent shockwaves through the research team. Dr. Krell and Dr. Clark huddled together, poring over data and formulating new hypotheses. It appears that prolonged exposure to Greg's altered pheromones is triggering physiological changes in Zira, Dr. Clark explained during a tense briefing. This could be the breakthrough we've been searching for. The decision to intensify the experiments was met with mixed reactions. Some team members raised ethical concerns, worried about the long-term effects on both Greg and Zira. Others saw it as a necessary step towards solving the Vidian fertility crisis. As Greg prepared for another round of tests, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the precipice of something monumental. The weight of two species' hopes rested on his shoulders, and the line between subject and scientist was blurring with each passing day. Outside the facility, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. News of Greg's altered physiology had leaked, sparking outrage among certain human factions. Victor Krantz, a charismatic politician with a xenophobic agenda, stood before a crowd of angry protesters, his voice booming through loudspeakers. We cannot allow these aliens to contaminate our genetic purity, Krantz shouted, eliciting cheers from the gathered masses. Demand an end to these dangerous experiments. Protect humanity's future. Inside the research complex, Captain Evelyn Drake of the newly formed United Earth Government Task Force strode through the corridors, her presence a stark reminder of the growing tensions. She paused outside the testing chamber, watching through the observation window as Greg and Zira prepared for their next session. Are we making progress, Dr. Clark? She asked, her voice tight with concern. Dr. Clark nodded, his eyes never leaving the monitors. We're on the verge of something groundbreaking, Captain. But the political situation... Leave the politics to me, Drake interrupted. Your job is to find answers, and fast. As Greg entered the chamber, his eyes met Zira's. There was a newfound intensity in her gaze, a mixture of scientific curiosity and something deeper, more primal. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead. The door sealed behind him with a hiss, isolating them from the outside world and its mounting pressures. For now, there was only the two of them, the quiet hum of machinery and the promise of discovery hanging in the air between them. The air in the chamber felt charged with possibility as Greg and Zira began their next round of tests. We'll start with the new protocol today, Dr. Clark's voice crackled through the intercom. Remember, your comfort and safety are paramount. If at any point either of you feels uncomfortable, signal immediately. Greg nodded, his heart racing as Zira approached. Her movements were more fluid now, less robotic than when they had first met. She reached out, her cool fingers making contact with his bare arm. The effect was instantaneous. Greg felt a surge of warmth spreading from the point of contact, his skin tingling with an unfamiliar energy. Zira's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. Fascinating, she murmured, her scientific detachment wavering. The cellular response is unprecedented. As they progressed through the protocol, the intensity of their interactions increased. What began as simple touch exercises evolved into more intimate contact, always under the watchful eyes of the research team. Greg found himself hyper-aware of every sensation, every minute change in Zira's expression. Hours passed, blurring together in a haze of tactile exploration and data collection. When they finally emerged from the chamber, both were visibly affected. Greg's skin felt electrified, while Zira's normally pale complexion had taken on a flushed, almost iridescent quality. Dr. Krell awaited them, his eyes gleaming with excitement. The preliminary results are astounding, he announced. Zira, your hormone levels have spiked significantly, and Greg, your pheromone output has increased tenfold. As the days wore on, the experiments grew more intense. Greg and Zira spent increasing amounts of time in close proximity, their bodies seemingly attuned to one another. The research team observed with a mixture of scientific fascination and growing concern. We're pushing the boundaries of ethical research, Dr. Clark confided to Captain Drake during one of their daily briefings. The physiological changes we're seeing in both subjects are unprecedented. Drake's expression was grim. I understand the potential benefits, Doctor, but we're walking a fine line here. The political situation outside is deteriorating rapidly. Indeed, beyond the walls of the research complex, tensions were reaching a boiling point. Viktor Kranz's anti-alien rhetoric had gained traction, drawing thousands of protesters to the facility's gates. The air was thick with the chants of the crowd, their anger palpable even from within the reinforced walls. Protect humanity! End the experiments! The slogans echoed through the corridors, a constant reminder of the pressure they faced. Inside the quarantine wing, Boron sat perfectly still, her eyes closed in a deep concentration. The malfunctioning device that had triggered her initial breakdown had unlocked something within her mind. Now she found herself processing information at an unprecedented rate, her understanding of human biology expanding exponentially. Dr. Krell observed her through the observation window, his curiosity piqued. Her neural activity is off the charts, he muttered to himself. We may need to reconsider her role in this project. Back in the main research area, Greg and Zira prepared for another session. As they entered the chamber, Greg couldn't help but notice the change in Zira's demeanor. Her movements were more fluid, almost graceful, and there was a new light in her eyes. Are you ready? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zira nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I believe I am, Greg. As they began the now familiar routine of physical contact, something shifted. Zira's touch lingered longer than usual, her fingers tracing patterns on Greg's skin. He felt a jolt of electricity course through him, his body responding in ways he couldn't have anticipated. Suddenly, Zira gasped, her body tensing. Greg, I feel strange, she managed to say before doubling over. Alarms blared as the monitoring equipment registered the sudden change. Dr. Clark and Dr. Krell rushed into the chamber, their faces masks of concern and excitement. "Her reproductive system," Dr. Krell exclaimed, studying the readouts. "It's reactivating." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Zira was whisked away for extensive testing, while Greg underwent his own battery of examinations. The research team worked tirelessly, poring over data and formulating new theories. When the dust settled, the implications were staggering. Scans revealed the formation of what appeared to be viable Vidian eggs within Zira's body, something not seen in generations. "This could be the breakthrough we've been searching for," Dr. Krell announced to the assembled team, his voice trembling with impossibly strong excitement. "If we can replicate these results, we may have found the key to saving our species." The news spread like wildfire, reaching beyond the confines of the research facility. As word of the potential breakthrough leaked to the public, opinions began to shift. Many who had been skeptical of the experiments now saw them as a beacon of hope for interspecies cooperation. However, not everyone welcomed this development. Victor Krantz seized upon the news, twisting it to fit his xenophobic narrative. "They're trying to corrupt our very DNA," he roared to his followers. "This is just the beginning of their plan to infiltrate and destroy humanity from within." Inside the facility, Greg struggled to come to terms with his newfound importance. The weight of two species' futures pressed down on him, making each breath feel like a monumental effort. "How are you holding up?" Dr. Clark asked him during a brief respite between tests. Greg ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion evident in every movement. "I'm managing," he replied, his voice hoarse. "It's just a lot to process." Dr. Clark nodded sympathetically. "I know it's overwhelming, but what you're doing here is incredibly important. We're making history, Greg." As they prepared for the next round of experiments, a debate raged among the research team. Dr. Clark advocated for a pause in the trials, concerned about Greg's increasing fatigue. Dr. Krell, however, argued vehemently against any interruption. "We cannot risk losing momentum now," the Vidian scientist insisted. "Every moment counts when the fate of our species hangs in the balance." Captain Drake, observing the heated exchange, felt the weight of her responsibility more keenly than ever. The decision to continue or halt the experiments would have far-reaching consequences, not just for the individuals involved, but for the future of human-alien relations. As Greg entered the chamber once more, his eyes met Zira's. There was a new depth to her gaze, a mixture of scientific curiosity and something more primal, more human. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead. The door sealed behind them with a familiar hiss, isolating them from the chaos of the outside world. For now, there was only the two of them, the quiet hum of machinery and the promise of discovery hanging in the air between them. As the next phase of experiments began, both Greg and Zira knew that they stood on the precipice of something monumental, their actions poised to shape the future of two species. Species. The weight of that responsibility hung heavy in the air as Greg and Zira continued their work. Days turned into weeks, and the intensity of the experiments increased. Dr. Krell, emboldened by the unprecedented progress, proposed a controversial expansion of the research program. During a tense meeting with the project leaders, he laid out his plan. "We need to determine if this phenomenon is unique to Greg or if it can be replicated with other human subjects," Dr. Krell explained, his eyes gleaming with barely held-back excitement. "I propose we recruit additional human males with similar physiological profiles." Dr. Clark's brow furrowed as he considered the implications. "While I understand the potential benefits, we must consider the ethical ramifications. We're dealing with uncharted territory here, and the risks to both human and Vidian subjects are not fully understood." Captain Drake, who had been silently observing the exchange, spoke up. "I share Dr. Clark's concerns, but we can't ignore the potential breakthrough this represents. Perhaps a compromise is in order." After hours of heated debate, a decision was reached. 3 new human male volunteers would be carefully selected and thoroughly briefed on the nature and potential dangers of the experiment. The selection process was rigorous, involving extensive medical examinations and psychological evaluations. In the end, 3 candidates were chosen: Michael Torres, a former military officer with a steely tenacity, Rajesh Patel, a brilliant bioengineer whose curiosity outweighed his apprehension, and Alex Kowalski, a professional athlete whose peak physical condition made him an ideal subject. As the new volunteers were integrated into the program, Greg found himself struggling. The prolonged exposure to alien biology and the relentless pace of the experiments had taken their toll. He experienced bouts of extreme fatigue, his mood swinging wildly from one moment to the next. During a routine examination, Dr. Clark noticed Greg's hands trembling as he buttoned his shirt. "Greg, I think we need to discuss reducing your involvement in the active trials," he said gently. "Your health has to be our priority." Greg nodded, too exhausted to argue. "I understand, Doc. It's just hard to step back when so much is at stake." Dr. Krell, overhearing the exchange, impossibly strong his frustration. "We cannot afford to lose our most compatible subject now. The progress we've made is meaningless if we endanger Greg's life in the process," Dr. Clark interrupted firmly. "We have new volunteers. Let's focus on what we can learn from them while we address Greg's health issues." As Greg's participation decreased, Zira found herself working more closely with the new subjects. Each interaction yielded different results, fascinating in their own right, but lacking the intensity she had experienced with Greg. During a late-night analysis session, Dr. Krell pored over the data, his excitement growing. "Fascinating," he muttered to himself. "The physiological responses vary significantly between subjects, but none match the level of compatibility we observed with Greg. This suggests a unique genetic factors at play." Outside the facility, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. Victor Krantz, armed with leaked information about the expanded experiments, rallied his followers to more aggressive action. "They're not content with corrupting one of our own," he shouted to a sea of angry faces. "Now they want to taint even more of our men with their alien influence." The crowd's fury reached a boiling point. A group of extremists, their faces contorted with rage, attempted to breach the facility's security perimeter. Captain Drake's security forces responded swiftly, but the resulting clash left several protesters injured and the situation more volatile than ever. Inside the research complex, the team worked tirelessly, acutely aware of the growing pressure from all sides. Dr. Clark divided his time between overseeing the experiments with the new volunteers and monitoring Greg's declining health. During one particularly tense day, alarms blared throughout the facility. Greg had collapsed during a routine checkup, his body racked with convulsions. Medical teams rushed to stabilize him as both human and Vidian doctors struggled to understand the cause of his sudden deterioration. Dr. Clark, his face pale with worry, turned to Dr. Krell. "We need to consider halting the experiments entirely. Greg's condition is unlike anything we've seen before. It's as if his entire biology is in flux." Before Dr. Krell could respond, a junior researcher burst into the room. "Doctors, you need to see this immediately. It's about Boron." In the quarantine wing, Boron sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes closed in a deep concentration. The walls of her room were covered in complex equations and diagrams, scrawled in a frenzied hand. Dr. Krell pressed his face against the observation window, his eyes wide with astonishment. "Incredible," he breathed. "She's developed a theoretical model that could explain the mechanism behind Zira's reactivated fertility." As the implications of Boron's breakthrough sank in, the research team found themselves at a crossroads. The potential for a major scientific advancement loomed tantalizingly close, but the risks and ethical concerns had never been more pronounced. In the medical bay, Greg lay unconscious, his body undergoing changes that defied explanation. Zira stood by his bedside, her usually composed features marred with worry. The new volunteers watched from a distance, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. Outside, the chants of protesters grew louder, a constant reminder of the volatile situation beyond the facility's walls. And somewhere above, in the cold vacuum of space, Vidian ships hovered in Earth's orbit, their presence a silent testament to the interstellar implications of the experiments unfolding below. As night fell, the research team huddled together, acutely aware that their next decisions would shape not only the future of their experiment, but potentially the course of human-Vidian relations for generations to come. The air crackled with tension, possibilities, and the weight of choices yet to be made. As the research team grappled with the weight of their next decisions, alarms blared throughout the facility, shattering the tense silence. Dr. Clark's eyes widened in shock as he glanced at the medical readouts. "Greg's vitals are crashing," he shouted, already sprinting towards the medical bay. The team rushed after him, their footsteps echoing through the sterile corridors. They burst into the room to find Greg convulsing on the bed, his body arching unnaturally. Zira stood frozen, her hands covering her mouth in horror. "We need to stabilize him now," Dr. Clark barked, grabbing a nearby crash cart. The medical team swarmed around Greg, working in frantic synchronization. Hours passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Clark wiped sweat from his brow, staring intently at the monitors. "His cells, they're changing at an unprecedented rate," he murmured, disbelief coloring his voice. Dr. Krell leaned in, his eyes widening as he studied the readouts. "Fascinating," he breathed. "It's as if his physiology is incorporating elements of Vidayan biology." As they worked tirelessly to keep Greg alive, a commotion outside the facility caught their attention. Captain Drake burst into the room, her face etched with concern. "We've got a situation," she announced grimly. "A Vidayan medical ship just entered Earth's orbit. They're demanding we transfer Greg to their care." Dr. Clark's head snapped up. "Out of the question. We can't risk moving him in this condition." "We may not have a choice," Captain Drake replied, her voice tight. "The ship's called the VSS Helios. It's apparently equipped with technology far beyond what we have here." Before they could argue further, Greg's monitors shrieked in unison. His body went rigid, then fell eerily still. "We're losing him!" Dr. Clark shouted, diving back into action. In the chaos that followed, Captain Drake made a decision that would change the course of history. "Prepare Greg for immediate transfer to the Helios," she ordered, her voice cutting through the pandemonium. Despite protests from Earth's governments, a shuttle was quickly prepared. As they loaded Greg's unconscious form, Dr. Clark stepped forward. "I'm going with him," he stated firmly, brooking no argument. The journey to the Helios was tense, filled with the beeping of portable medical equipment and Dr. Clark's murmured encouragements to his unresponsive patient. As they docked with the Vidian ship, they were met by a team led by Dr. Thera, a tall, willowy Vidian with piercing violet eyes. "Quickly," she urged, her voice melodic yet firm. "Bring him to our medical bay." The Helios's medical facilities were a marvel of advanced technology. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing detailed scans of Greg's rapidly changing physiology. "Incredible," Dr. Thera murmured, her fingers dancing over the controls. "His cellular structure is rewriting itself, creating a perfect bridge between human and Vidayan genetic patterns." As Dr. Clark and Dr. Thera worked side by side, trading knowledge and theories, Greg's condition slowly stabilized. Days passed in a blur of tests, treatments, and breakthroughs. Meanwhile, on Earth, the situation spiraled out of control. Victor Krantz seized upon Greg's transfer, spinning it as an alien abduction. "They've taken one of our own," he roared to a sea of angry faces. "How many more will they steal before we stand up and fight?" Riots erupted in major cities, with mobs attacking Vidian diplomatic outposts. The United Earth government, overwhelmed by the sudden surge of violence, declared martial law in affected areas. Back on the Helios, Greg's eyes fluttered open for the first time in days. He blinked, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings with surprising calm. "How are you feeling?" Dr. Clark asked, leaning over him with concern. Greg opened his mouth to respond, but what came out was not English. A series of clicks and whistles filled the air. Perfect Vidian speech. Dr. Thera's eyes widened in shock. "He's speaking our language," she gasped. "Fluently, with a Central Plateau accent, no less." Greg looked between them, confusion evident on his face. "What do you mean?" he asked, this time in English. "I understood you perfectly, Doctor." As they marveled at this unexpected development, an urgent transmission came through from Earth. Dr. Krell's face appeared on a nearby screen, his expression a mix of excitement and concern. "Zira's physiology is changing," he reported breathlessly. It mirrors Greg's transformation, but at a slower rate. She's incorporating human genetic elements. Dr. Thera's mind raced with the implications. A two-way genetic bridge, she mused. The possibilities are staggering. As they discussed the ramifications of these developments, another alert sounded. A human ship was approaching the Helios, a diplomatic vessel led by Admiral Helena Frost. On the bridge of the Helios, the Vidian captain received the transmission from the approaching ship. Admiral Frost's stern face filled the screen. "This is Admiral Helena Frost of the United Earth Government," she announced, her voice crisp and authoritative. "We are here to assess the situation and negotiate the return of all human personnel. Prepare to receive our delegation." As the Helios prepared for the arrival of Earth's representatives, tension hung heavy in the air. The decisions made in the coming hours would shape the future of human-Vidian relations, and possibly the evolutionary path of both species. Greg, now able to move about the ship, stood at a viewport, gazing down at the blue marble of Earth. His reflection in the glass showed a face that was subtly altered, still recognizably human, but with an undeniable alien cast to his features. He placed a hand against the cool surface, feeling the weight of his unique position between two worlds. In the medical bay, Dr. Clark and Dr. Thera hurriedly prepared their findings, knowing they would soon face intense scrutiny from both human and Vidian authorities. The question hung unspoken between them. How much should they reveal about Greg's transformation and its potential consequences? As Admiral Frost's ship began its final approach, the crew of the Helios braced themselves for a confrontation that would determine the course of interstellar relations for generations to come. Come! The air thrummed with anticipation as the Helios's docking bay prepared to receive Admiral Frost's ship. Greg watched the approaching vessel through the viewport, his altered features reflected in the glass. He turned as Dr. Clark and Dr. Thera approached, their faces a mix of concern and excitement. "It's time," Dr. Clark said softly. "Are you ready to meet the delegation?" Greg nodded, his voice a blend of human and Vidian tones as he replied, "As ready as I'll ever be." The three made their way to the docking bay, joining the Vidian captain and a small contingent of officers. The airlock hissed open, revealing Admiral Helena Frost, her piercing stare sweeping the assembled group before settling on Greg. "Mr. Warren," she said, her voice clipped and professional, "I see the reports of your transformation were not exaggerated." Greg met her gaze steadily. "No, Admiral, they weren't." Admiral Frost turned to Dr. Thera. "I believe we have much to discuss, Doctor. Shall we?" The group moved to a secure conference room, the atmosphere tense as human and Vidian representatives took their seats. Dr. Clark and Dr. Thera presented their findings, holographic displays flickering to life around the table, showing Greg's altered physiology in intricate detail. "As you can see," Dr. Thera explained, her melodic voice filling the room, "Mr. Warren's cellular structure has undergone a remarkable change, creating a bridge between human and Vidian genetics." Admiral Frost leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "And the implications of this bridge?" Dr. Clark stepped in. "The potential benefits are enormous, Admiral. Enhanced physical capabilities, increased cognitive function, possibly even extended lifespan." "And the risks?" Frost countered. "What's to prevent this from becoming a threat to human genetic purity?" The debate raged on, voices rising as ethical concerns clashed with scientific possibilities. Greg sat silently, acutely aware of his role as both subject and symbol of this unprecedented situation. Suddenly, the door burst open. Dr. Krell rushed in, his face flushed with excitement. "Doctors, Admiral, you need to see this immediately. It's Zira." The group hurried to the medical bay, where they found Zira surrounded by a team of perplexed doctors. Her body shimmered with a faint, otherworldly glow, her features subtly altered to reflect a blend of human and Vidian characteristics. Dr. Thera's eyes widened as she studied the readouts. "Impossible," she breathed. "Her reproductive system, it's active, fully functional." The implications of this discovery sent shockwaves through the room. Admiral Frost, her earlier skepticism giving way to cautious optimism, turned to Dr. Clark. A joint research initiative, she proposed, with strict oversight from both sides. We need to understand what's happening here. Before anyone could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. The Vidian captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Admiral Frost, we're receiving an urgent transmission from Earth. You need to see this. They rushed to the bridge, where a holographic display showed scenes of chaos erupting across Earth's major cities. Victor Krantz's face filled the screen, his eyes burning with fanatical intensity. This is a message to the alien invaders and their human collaborators, he snarled. We have seized control of the North American electromagnetic pulse array. Unless all Vidians leave Earth immediately and return our people, we will detonate it, wiping out your technology and freeing humanity from your influence. The bridge erupted into a flurry of activity. Admiral Frost barked orders to her staff, coordinating with Earth's military to assess the threat. Dr. Clark and Dr. Thera huddled with Greg and Zira, their voices low and urgent. We can't let this happen, Greg said, his newly enhanced mind racing through possibilities. I can help. My new abilities. I might be able to infiltrate their stronghold, disable the weapon. Admiral Frost overheard and approached, her expression grave. It's too risky, Warren. We don't fully understand your condition. It's our best chance, Greg insisted. I know how these people think. I can get inside. A tense silence fell over the bridge as Admiral Frost weighed her options. Finally, she nodded. All right, Warren, but you're not going alone. Zira stepped forward, her hand intertwining with Greg's. I'm going with him, she announced, her voice brooking no argument. Our abilities complement each other. Together, we have the best chance of success. As preparations for the mission began, Dr. Krell pulled Dr. Clark and Dr. Thera aside. There's something else you need to know, he said, his voice low. The data from Greg and Zira's transformations. It suggests their changes could potentially be replicated in others. Dr. Thera's eyes widened. You mean... Dr. Krell nodded. Yes, but the process would be complex, intimate. The ethical implications alone... Their discussion was cut short as Greg and Zira emerged from the Helios's training simulation, their bodies moving with newfound grace and power. Admiral Frost watched them, her earlier doubts giving way to a glimmer of hope. All right, she said, addressing the assembled group. Here's the plan. Warren and Zira will infiltrate the Earth-First stronghold, neutralize the EMP threat. Meanwhile, we'll prepare a joint statement demonstrating the benefits of human-Vidian cooperation. As final preparations were made, Greg and Zira stood before the shuttle that would take them back to Earth. They exchanged a look, volumes passing between them without a word. Ready? Greg asked, his voice a blend of human commitment and Vidian determination. Zira nodded, her transformed features set with purpose. Together, she replied. As they boarded the shuttle, the weight of their mission settled upon them. The fate of two species, the future of human-Vidian relations, and the safety of Earth itself rested on their shoulders. The shuttle's engines roared to life, propelling them towards an uncertain future and a world on the brink of chaos. Chaos. The shuttle's engines ignited, propelling Greg and Zira towards an uncertain future and a world on the brink of disaster. As they descended through Earth's atmosphere, the comm system crackled to life. Admiral Frost's voice cut through the static, her tone urgent. Warren, Zira, we've received updated intel. The Earth-First movement has fortified their position in a remote military bunker in the Rocky Mountains. The EMP weapon is primed and ready to disable all alien technology in orbit. Greg's hands tightened on the controls. Understood, Admiral. We're adjusting course now. Zira studied the holographic display, her newly enhanced vision picking out details invisible to human eyes. The bunker's defenses are formidable, she noted, her voice a harmonious blend of human and Vidian tones. We'll need support on the ground. As if in answer to her words, the shuttle touched down in a clearing. A figure emerged from the tree line, flanked by a team of operatives in stealth gear. Captain Evelyn Drake, her face set in unwavering commitment, approached as Greg and Zira disembarked. Welcome to Earth, Drake said, her eyes widening slightly at their altered appearances. We've got some toys for you. The team unveiled a series of specialized equipment designed to work with Greg and Zira's hybrid physiologies. Greg marveled at the sleek exosuit that seemed to mold itself to his body, enhancing his already impressive strength and reflexes. Zira, meanwhile, activated a cloaking device that shimmered in perfect harmony with her heightened senses. As they made their way through the dense forest towards the bunker, Greg found himself instinctively tapping into his new Vidian language skills, the air filled with a cacophony of encrypted chatter from Earth-First operatives. "They're changing guard rotations," Greg translated, his mind effortlessly decoding the messages. "Southwest entrance in 2 minutes." Captain Drake nodded, signaling her team to move. They slipped past the first 2 security checkpoints undetected, Greg's intel proving invaluable. However, as they approached the third, a patrol rounded the corner unexpectedly. Time seemed to slow as Greg's enhanced reflexes kicked in. He saw the flash of recognition in the guard's eyes, the minute twitch of a finger on a trigger. Without conscious thought, Greg moved. The exosuit amplified his strength as he launched himself forward, closing the distance in a heartbeat. His fist connected with the guard's solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs before he could raise the alarm. Simultaneously, Zira shimmered into visibility behind the second guard, her hand finding a pressure point that sent him crumpling to the ground. The moment of surprise passed, and chaos erupted. Alarms blared as Earth-First forces converged on their position. Greg and Zira fought back-to-back, their movements a fluid dance of human and Vidian combat techniques. Greg's augmented strength sent opponents flying, while Zira's cloaking ability allowed her to appear and disappear at will, sowing confusion among their attackers. As they pushed deeper into the facility, a figure appeared on the security monitors. Victor Krantz, his face contorted with rage, barked orders to his subordinates. Suddenly, his eyes widened as he caught sight of Greg and Zira on the cameras. "No," Krantz snarled. "I won't let these abominations ruin everything." He pounded his fist down on a large red button, and new alarms began to sound throughout the complex. "Self-destruct sequence initiated," an automated voice announced. "T-minus 10 minutes to detonation." Greg and Zira exchanged a quick glance. "I'll go after Krantz," Greg said. "You disable the self-destruct." Zira nodded, her eyes gleaming with grit. "Be careful," she said, before vanishing into thin air. Greg sprinted down the corridor, his exosuit allowing him to move at inhuman speeds. He caught fleeting glimpses of Krantz ahead, the Earth-First leader making a beeline for the EMP control room. Meanwhile, Zira materialized in front of a bank of computers. Her hands flew over the keyboards, her hybrid mind processing information at an astounding rate. But the self-destruct mechanism was more complex than she'd anticipated, requiring simultaneous input from multiple stations. Time ticked away as Zira racked her brain for a solution. Then an idea struck her. It was risky, potentially dangerous, but it might be their only chance. Taking a deep breath, she placed her hands directly on the main console and closed her eyes. Zira felt her consciousness expand, merging with the computer system. Her hybrid biology allowed her to interface directly with the machinery, her mind working in parallel to override the security protocols. It was an overwhelming sensation, like trying to direct a raging river with her bare hands. In the EMP control room, Greg finally caught up with Krantz. The Earth-First leader spun around, his eyes wild with fanatical zeal. "You're too late," he spat. "In moments, we'll be free of your alien influence forever." Greg's exosuit sensors picked up the surge of energy as Krantz activated the EMP weapon. With no time to think, Greg hurled himself forward, tackling Krantz away from the controls. They crashed to the ground, grappling fiercely. Krantz fought with the desperate strength of a cornered animal, but Greg's hybrid physiology gave him an insurmountable advantage. In a matter of seconds, he had Krantz pinned and the EMP weapon secured. "Self-destruct sequence aborted," the automated voice announced, just as Greg was securing Krantz with zip ties. Relief washed over Greg, followed quickly by concern. He tapped his communicator. "Zira, are you all right?" There was a moment of silence that seemed to stretch into eternity before Zira's voice came through, weak but alive. "I'm here, Greg, but something's not right." Greg's heart raced as he made his way to Zira's location. dragging a subdued Krantz with him. He found her slumped over the computer console, her body trembling slightly. As Greg helped Zira to her feet, Captain Drake and her team secured the remaining Earth-First members. They emerged from the bunker to find a joint human-Vidian task force waiting, alerted by Drake's distress signal. While medical teams rushed to attend to Greg and Zira, news of their crucial role in averting disaster spread rapidly. Holograms flickered to life around the world, showing the hybrid heroes who had saved humanity from itself. But as the adrenaline of the mission faded, both Greg and Zira began to experience unsettling symptoms. Greg felt a strange tingling sensation spreading through his body, while Zira struggled to focus, her merged consciousness seeming to fragment. As they were loaded onto a shuttle bound for the VSS Helios, Dr. Krell's voice came over the comm system, his tone a mix of excitement and concern. "We've made a startling discovery based on the data from your mission," he explained. "It seems that sustained intimate contact between compatible human and Vidian subjects could potentially stabilize the hybrid physiology." Greg and Zira exchanged a look, the implications of this revelation hanging heavy between them. As the shuttle lifted off, carrying them back to the Helios for emergency treatment, they knew that the true challenges and possibilities of their unique situation were only beginning to unfold. The shuttle's ascent was smooth, but Greg and Zira's conditions were anything but stable. Greg's skin prickled with an uncomfortable heat, while Zira's eyes darted unfocused, her consciousness slipping in and out of coherence. "Stay with me," Greg urged, gripping Zira's hand tightly. His own voice sounded distant, as if coming from underwater. The shuttle docked with the VSS Helios, and a flurry of activity erupted. Medical teams swarmed around them, their voices a cacophony of urgent commands and status reports. Greg felt himself being lifted onto a gurney, the world tilting and spinning around him. Through the haze, he caught glimpses of Zira on another gurney beside him. Her skin had taken on a sickly pallor, its usual iridescent sheen dulled and mottled. Greg tried to reach out to her, but his limbs felt leaden and unresponsive. They were rushed through the corridors of the Helios, the ship's sterile white environment blurring into a featureless tunnel. Greg's enhanced senses, usually so sharp and clear, now overwhelmed him with a barrage of disjointed input. Every sound echoed painfully, every light seared his retinas. In the medical bay, Dr. Krell and Dr. Clark worked with frantic precision. Their hands flew over control panels, adjusting settings and administering treatments. Greg felt the cool touch of medical scanners against his skin, heard the rapid beeping of vital sign monitors. "Their hybrid physiologies are destabilizing," Dr. Clark announced, her voice tense. "Conventional treatments aren't having any effect." Dr. Krell's face appeared in Greg's field of vision, his expression a mix of concern and purpose. "Greg, Zira, can you hear me? We're doing everything we can, but your conditions are deteriorating rapidly." Greg managed a weak nod, fighting to stay conscious. He turned his head, seeking out Zira. She lay on the adjacent bed, her chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Greg felt a surge of something indefinable, a connection that transcended their physical forms. Dr. Krell continued, his words coming faster now. "We've made a discovery based on the data from your mission. It seems that sustained intimate contact between compatible human and Vidian subjects could potentially stabilize the hybrid physiology." The implications of this statement took a moment to penetrate Greg's foggy mind. When understanding dawned, he felt a mix of hope and trepidation. He glanced at Zira again, saw the same complex emotions reflected in her eyes. "We don't have time for extensive testing," Dr. Clark interjected. "If we're going to try this, it needs to be now." Greg summoned his strength, forcing his voice to work. "Do it," he rasped, "whatever it takes." Zira's voice joined his, weak but resolute. "Together," she echoed their earlier sentiment. The medical team sprang into action. Greg and Zira were carefully transferred to a specially prepared chamber adjacent to the main medical bay. The room was bathed in a soft, pulsating light that seemed to shift between human and Vidian spectrums. As the door sealed behind them, Greg became aware of a subtle change in the air. A mixture of scents filled the chamber, some familiar, others utterly alien. His hybrid physiology responded instinctively, his heartbeat quickening. Greg and Zira were positioned side by side on a large contoured surface. Despite his weakness, Greg felt an inexorable pull towards Zira. Their hands found each other, fingers intertwining. The moment their skin made contact, Greg felt a jolt of energy course through him. It was as if a circuit had been completed, power flowing between them. Zira gasped, her eyes widening. "It's working," Dr. Krell's voice came over the intercom. "Your vital signs are beginning to stabilize. Keep going." Encouraged by this progress, Greg turned to face Zira fully. Their eyes locked, and in that instant, the rest of the world fell away. Greg saw himself reflected in Zira's gaze, not as he had been, but as he was now, a fusion of human and Vidian. And in that reflection, he saw beauty. They came together in a desperate embrace, their bodies pressing close. Greg felt the unique texture of Zira's hybrid skin against his own, a sensation both familiar and thrillingly new. As their physical intimacy deepened, Greg became aware of another level of connection forming between them. Images and sensations flooded his mind, memories that weren't his own. He saw the Vidian homeworld through Zira's eyes, felt the weight of her people's history. In turn, he shared with her the richness of human culture, the complexity of Earth's ecosystems. Their minds merged just as their bodies had, creating a shared consciousness that bridged the gap between their species. Greg experienced Zira's thoughts as if they were his own, understanding her in a way that went beyond words or physical sensation. Hours passed, though time seemed to lose all meaning within their intimate cocoon. Greg felt his body changing, cells realigning and stabilizing. The discomfort and disorientation that had plagued him since the mission began gradually faded away, replaced by a sense of balance and harmony. When they finally separated, Greg knew immediately that something fundamental had shifted. He felt more complete, more integrated than ever before. Beside him, Zira's eyes shone with newfound clarity and strength. The chamber door opened, and Dr. Krell entered, his face alight with scientific wonder. "Remarkable," he breathed, studying the readouts on his handheld scanner. "Your hybrid physiologies have not only stabilized, but appear to have undergone further integration. You've achieved a level of human Vidian synthesis we never thought possible." As Greg and Zira sat up, supporting each other, Dr. Clark joined them. "How do you feel?" she asked, her tone a mix of professional curiosity and genuine concern. Greg looked at Zira, feeling the echo of their shared experience resonating between them. "Different," he said simply, "but right." Zira nodded, her hybrid features softening into a smile. "We are more than we were," she added, "yet still ourselves." Dr. Krell's excitement was palpable. "This changes everything," he said, already tapping notes into his datapad. "The implications for the experimental mating program, for interspecies relations." "One step at a time, Doctor," Dr. Clark interjected gently. She turned back to Greg and Zira. "You've been through an extraordinary experience. You'll need time to adjust and recover." Greg nodded, suddenly aware of the bone-deep exhaustion settling over him. But beneath the fatigue was a current of energy, a sense of potential waiting to be explored. As they were helped from the chamber, Greg caught sight of their reflection in a polished panel. He and Zira stood side by side, their bodies a harmonious blend of human and Vidian traits. But it was more than physical. There was a synchronicity to their movements, a shared awareness that went beyond the visible. Greg realized that their journey was not nearly finished. The bond they now shared opened up new questions, new possibilities. As they made their way back to the medical bay for further observation, he felt equal parts trepidation and exhilaration at the thought of what lay ahead. The VSS Helios hummed around them, its mission of exploration and diplomacy now irrevocably intertwined with their personal odyssey. Whatever challenges awaited them, Greg knew one thing with unshakable certainty. He and Zira would face them together, as something entirely new in the universe.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.